What is up? What is up, YouTube? How y'all doing? I ran across this video. It's kind of short, but I thought it was amazing, man, how what I was forced to deliver to Diddy's mansion as a truck driver will keep you up at night. Now, a lot of people have, my team has told me that, you know, these are just stories, they're not real. But imagine, here's the thing that I want people to, these stories come from somewhere, y'all. I'm not saying that, and I'm saying this because I don't want you all to think that I'm pushing some bull on you, but just imagine stuff like this really happening, because I didn't believe there was tunnels. I didn't believe that people can do this to little kids, and there's so many kids missing. Why are all these kids missing? 500,000 just in the United States alone. Why is all this happening? Because we honestly don't think we honestly don't think it could happen. So y'all hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, and keep an open mind. Don't look at this stuff as who's right, who's wrong. Look at it as learning information. Learning information. Let's check it out, man. Here we go.
Africa.
From the top.
There are kids in there from Africa.
Kids from Africa.
From Mexico.
Kids.
We got to this spot right over the border. They went past these colorful houses. They turned down these dirt roads, and there was a bunch of trucks, and they divvied everybody out like fucking retail.
You ever have one of those moments where you think, this can't be real? That's exactly how I felt when I got that phone call. I'd spent over 30 years as a truck driver, and let me tell you, I'd seen just about everything on the road. From the adrenaline of near misses on icy highways to the mind-numbing monotony of endless stretches of asphalt, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But this was something else entirely. When I first started driving, I was all in. I loved it. The freedom, the hum of the engine, the ever-changing scenery. I'd take pride in knowing every inch of my rig, double-checking the trailer, the engine, the tires before every trip. Back then, I even wanted to know what I was hauling. Was it furniture, food, machinery? It mattered to me. But as the years rolled on, that passion faded. The loneliness crept in, the roots started blurring together, and I stopped caring about the details. By the time I hung up my keys, I was just going through the motions, worn down by the grind. Retirement was supposed to be my escape, a chance to finally breathe, spend time with my family, and leave the road behind for good. So when my phone rang that day, I almost didn't pick up. It was my old manager, a guy I hadn't heard from in years. My first thought was, what could he possibly want? And he didn't waste any time. No small talk, no catching up, just straight to the point.
Hey guys, thank you for watching our videos. If you want to check out our live channel, the Music Recording Network Live, where we dive deeper into videos that we put up and talk about different things that's going on in the world. You can participate in our chat, or you can come on live. You don't even have to show your face. Go to our live channel, subscribe, voice your opinion, because we would like to hear from you and help us come up with solutions. Now, let's continue on with this video.
He had a job for me. 2 trips. That's all. At first, I laughed it off. I'm retired, I told him. Why would I go back? But then he said the one thing that made me pause. $1 million. Half up front, half after the second trip. My first reaction was disbelief. $1 million? For 2 trips? That kind of money was more than I'd ever seen in my entire career, even when trucking was booming. It didn't make sense. I tried to push back, still skeptical. Why me? I asked. You've got plenty of younger guys who could do this. His response caught me off guard. The client requested someone experienced, someone reliable. It's a big deal. Diddy's involved. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm not the kind of guy who keeps up with celebrity gossip or knows who's trending in Hollywood. The name didn't mean much to me, but the way he said it carried weight. It wasn't just a job. It was something more. An opportunity? Maybe. Or maybe it was a headache waiting to happen. But $1 million is $1 million, and against my better judgment, I found myself saying yes. 2 days later, I pulled up to the desolate lot, my headlights cutting through the early morning mist. My partner for the job was already there, leaning casually against his truck like he'd been waiting for hours. He was younger, probably by a couple of decades, and his sharp, no-nonsense demeanor practically screamed, "Don't ask questions!" We exchanged a brief nod, nothing more before my old manager stepped out from the shadows, clipboard in hand. All right," he began, his tone clipped and businesslike. "Here's how this works. 1. You do not open the trailer. Don't even think about it. 2. You'll have 2 escort cars the whole way. 1 in front, 1 behind. 3. Hand over your phones before you leave." That last rule made me pause. "Why the phones?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of unease. "The client doesn't want distractions," he said, dismissing my concern like it was nothing. "Look, you're being paid more than anyone else ever has for this kind of work. Just follow the rules." I glanced at my partner, hoping to see some kind of reaction that might reassure me, but he was stone-faced, staring straight ahead like this was just another day on the job. The whole setup felt off. The secrecy, the strict rules, the isolation. But then I thought about the paycheck. $1 million. That number had a way of silencing doubts. Reluctantly, I handed over my phone, feeling a strange pang of vulnerability as it left my hand. With a nod from my manager, I climbed into the truck, the familiar hum of the engine beneath me oddly comforting despite the growing unease in my chest. The first few hours were uneventful. Too uneventful. I kept the radio on, letting the static-laden music fill the silence, but it did little to settle my nerves. My partner sat beside me, quiet and motionless, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. He hadn't said more than a few words since we'd met, and I wasn't about to break the awkward silence. Then, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I heard it. A faint banging coming from the trailer. It wasn't loud, just rhythmic enough to grab my attention. My stomach tightened as I glanced at the rearview mirrors, the dark silhouette of the trailer looming behind us. "Did you hear that?" I finally asked, my voice low. My partner didn't even turn his head. "Yeah?" he replied flatly, his tone giving nothing away. "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." Easier said than done. That sound, it wasn't the kind of noise cargo made when it shifted. It was deliberate, almost human. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. The escort cars remained steady, their lights cutting through the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe the cargo was shifting, I thought, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't random or chaotic. It had a pattern, like someone or something was trying to get out. The rhythmic banging clawed at my nerves, making it impossible to focus on anything else. When we stopped to switch drivers, I finally worked up the courage to bring it up to my partner. "You hear that?" I asked, nodding toward the back of the truck. He hesitated just for a moment, long enough for me to catch it before giving a curt nod. "Yeah," he said flatly, "but don't think about it. We're being paid to keep our mouths shut." His words didn't sit right with me. They weren't just dismissive. They were a warning. Whatever was in that trailer, he didn't want to talk about it, and that made me even more uneasy. But we were miles from civilization in the dead of night, and I knew better than to press him. Some questions are better left unanswered. Still, the sound stayed with me, even after we hit the road again. Every thud from the trailer felt deliberate, calculated, as though it was daring me to pull over and take a look. But the manager's words echoed in my mind. You do not open the trailer. By the time we reached the destination, the sun was just starting to rise, casting an eerie glow over the estate ahead of us. And it wasn't just an estate. It was a fortress. Massive gates towered over perfectly manicured lawns that stretched as far as the eye could see. The house itself loomed in the distance, a sprawling mansion that seemed to radiate power. It was the kind of place that didn't just scream wealth, it screamed control. As we pulled up to the gates, security guards were already waiting for us. They moved like clockwork, their faces cold and unreadable, eyes scanning every inch of the truck and its surroundings. One of them stepped forward, motioning for us to stop at the loading dock. "Leave the truck here," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Wait outside." Climbed out, the air thick and heavy around me. My partner followed, keeping his usual stoic silence. A team of guards swarmed the truck the moment we stepped away, their movements sharp and efficient. They worked with a precision that felt unnatural, like they'd done this 100 times before. None of them spoke, and none of them even glanced in our direction. I stood there, watching them unload the trailer, my mind racing. I wanted to look closer, to catch a glimpse of what they were carrying, but the intensity of the guards made it clear I wouldn't get away with it. My partner stayed beside me, his jaw tight and his eyes darting around like he was trying to take in every detail. For the first time, I noticed something in him I hadn't seen before. Fear. That's when it hit me. Whatever we'd just transported, it wasn't ordinary cargo. And whoever these people were, they weren't taking any chances. Eventually, the guards handed us each a duffel bag. The weight of it in my hands was unmistakable. $500,000 in crisp bills. It should have felt like validation, a reward for a job well done. But it didn't. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, like the money carried some unseen weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that it came at a price, one I hadn't fully grasped yet.
Wow.
The second part of the job was supposed to be simple, just another delivery. Pick up a new truck from the same facility and take it to another undisclosed location. Straightforward, right? At least that's what I kept telling myself as we drove back through the barren landscape. But the unease from the first trip lingered, clinging to me like a shadow. If anything, it was worse. When we arrived, the facility looked exactly as it had before. Silent, empty, and isolated. No signs, no visible personnel except for the ever-present guards. Just that same haunting row of trucks lined up in the dim light, like ghosts waiting to be sent into the night. Something about it chilled me to my core, but I tried to push the feeling aside. The new truck was identical to the first, down to the smallest detail. It should have been routine. Climb in, start the engine, and get on with it. But as I approached the trailer, that nagging thought crept back into my mind. What's really in there? I glanced at my partner. He was busy with his own pre-checks, giving me just enough time. My curiosity had reached a breaking point. I needed to know. I told myself it was just to put my mind at ease. But deep down, I think I already knew the truth. Whatever was in these trailers wasn't normal cargo. With a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, I made my way to the back of the trailer.
Wow.
My heart was pounding as I reached for the latch. The metal felt ice cold under my fingers. I hesitated for a moment, questioning whether I really wanted to open it. But curiosity got the better of me. I gripped the latch and began to pull. Before I could even crack it open, a shadow loomed over me. I froze. A guard had appeared out of nowhere, his presence as silent and ominous as the facility itself.
Wow.
For a moment, he said nothing, just stared at me with an expression that was impossible to read. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to me without a word. I opened it with trembling fingers, my stomach churning as I pulled out the contents. Inside were photos of my family, my wife, my kids, my grandkids, all smiling. blissfully unaware of the danger that had suddenly entered their lives. The guard leaned in close, his voice cold and deliberate. "If anything goes wrong," he said, his tone devoid of emotion, "they'll be taken from your life." I froze. My heart felt like it stopped in my chest. The guard's eyes didn't waver. There was no doubt in his tone, no room for negotiation. He meant every word. Shaking, I stepped back from the trailer and nodded. "Understood," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. The guard didn't respond. He just stood there for a moment, watching me before walking away. I climbed into the truck, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. My partner shot me a glance but didn't ask any questions. Maybe he already knew, or maybe he didn't want to know. The second trip started much like the first, with the 2 escort cars flanking us on the highway. But this time, the noises from the trailer started almost immediately. The banging was louder, more frantic, and now there were muffled cries that sent chills down my spine. It was unmistakable. Someone was in there. At one point, I was so distracted that I ran a red light. The lead escort car had gone through on yellow, and I followed without even noticing the light had changed. A moment later, I heard the wail of a siren behind me. My chest tightened as a patrol officer pulled us over. The patrol car rolled up behind me, and I could see the officer stepping out, adjusting his belt as he approached the driver's side. My partner stiffened in his seat, his hand gripping the door handle like he was ready to bolt. I glanced at him, silently begging him to stay calm. The last thing we needed was to draw attention. The officer tapped on the window, and I rolled it down, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Afternoon, officer," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You ran a red back there," he said, his tone stern but not hostile. "License and registration." My palms were slick with sweat as I handed over my information. The officer's eyes flicked to the trailer, then back to me. "What are you hauling?" he asked. "Just freight," I said quickly, too quickly. My voice cracked, and I winced internally. I was blowing it. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, his tone casual but firm. Panic surged through me. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. My partner finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "We're on a deadline, officer. Perishable goods. Any delay, and we'll be held responsible for damages." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. He glanced at the trailer again, his hand resting on his belt. "Perishable, huh? Funny, I don't hear a refrigeration unit running." The air felt thick, suffocating. I was sure he could hear my heart hammering in my chest. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A black SUV pulling up behind the patrol car. It wasn't marked, but I knew immediately it wasn't random. 2 men in suits stepped out of the SUV and approached the officer. They exchanged a few words, too quiet for me to hear. The officer's posture changed instantly. He stiffened, nodded, then turned back to me. "You're free to go," he said curtly, handing back my license. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even breathe until the patrol car and SUV were both out of sight. My partner leaned back in his seat, letting out a long, slow exhale. "That was close," he muttered. The rest of the drive was a blur. The noises from the trailer didn't stop, but I couldn't even process them anymore. My mind was racing, piecing together fragments of what I'd just seen. Whoever was in charge of this operation wasn't just rich or powerful. They had connections that reached everywhere. Police, security, maybe even higher. When we finally reached the drop-off point, the relief I'd expected didn't come. The same guards were waiting, their faces unreadable as they unloaded the trailer. I wanted to ask them what was inside, to demand answers, but the envelope of photos still burned in my mind. I couldn't risk it, not now, not ever. This job wasn't just dangerous, it was something else entirely, and deep down I knew I'd never be the same after this. They moved with chilling efficiency, unloading the trailer as though they had done this 100 times before. But this time, something was different. My eyes caught something I wasn't supposed to see. One of the containers wasn't completely shut, just for a brief second, but it was long enough. I saw them, small trembling hands gripping the edge of the container. Pale, filthy, and weak, they looked like they barely had the strength to hold on. My stomach twisted into knots as the realization hit me. This wasn't just cargo. This wasn't something you could ignore. Before I could react, one of the guards slammed the container shut, sealing away whatever or whoever was inside. I must have gone pale because my partner nudged me sharply, breaking my trance. "Don't," he muttered under his breath. His voice was low, steady, but there was an edge to it. "We finish this, we get paid, and we walk away." I wanted to believe him. Wanted to cling to the idea that it was that simple. But those hands, the fragility of them, were burned into my memory. I couldn't shake the image, couldn't unhear the muffled cries that grew louder as the guards moved the containers toward the mansion. They didn't react, didn't acknowledge the sounds. They just worked, methodical and detached, like this was all part of a routine. When the trailer was finally empty, one of the guards approached us. He carried 2 black duffel bags and handed them over without a word. "Your payment," he said curtly, his tone colder than the night air. My partner grabbed his bag immediately, wasting no time. I hesitated. The bag felt heavier than it should have, not just in weight, but in meaning. It was the second half of the $1 million payout, yet holding it made my skin crawl. The money wasn't just money anymore. It felt stained, tainted by everything we'd just been part of. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "We're done, right?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. The guard didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes devoid of emotion, before nodding toward the truck. The message was clear: get out, leave now. My partner didn't wait for me. He was already climbing into the cab, his movements calm and deliberate, like he'd made peace with all of this. I followed, but my hands trembled as I grabbed the door handle. The trailer was empty now, lighter than before, but it didn't feel that way. If anything, it was worse. The absence of the cargo amplified the silence in the cab, filling the space with an oppressive weight that was impossible to ignore. We hit the road without a word. The escort cars that had flanked us earlier were gone now, leaving just the 2 of us alone on the highway. It should have been comforting, a sign that this nightmare was finally over, but it wasn't. Without the escorts, the air felt heavier, like we were more vulnerable than ever. Every passing car, every shadow in the distance felt like a pair of eyes watching us, waiting. My partner stared straight ahead, his face a mask of indifference. I wanted to ask him what he was thinking, if he felt the same unease that was clawing at me, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stared out the window, replaying the night's events over and over in my head. What had we just been a part of, and more importantly, what would happen next? When we reached the facility to drop off the truck, it was nearly midnight. The floodlights, harsh and unyielding, cast long shadows over the barren lot, making the already desolate place feel suffocating. The guards were waiting for us, their expressions cold and unreadable, the same as before. They took the truck without so much as a nod, leaving my partner and me standing there in the biting night air. One of the guards approached with a clipboard. "Final paperwork," he said, holding it out. My partner grabbed it first, scrawling his name with a quick flick of his wrist before shoving it back. He didn't even hesitate, but I did. My hand hovered over the page, pen trembling between my fingers. Images flashed through my mind. The trailer, the rhythmic banging, the muffled cries, those small trembling hands gripping the container. "Something wrong?" the guard asked. His tone was flat, almost disinterested, but there was an edge to it, a warning, subtle, but unmistakable. I shook my head. "No," I muttered, forcing myself to look away from his piercing gaze. With a deep breath, I signed the page. What choice did I have? The alternative was unthinkable. As soon as the paperwork was done, my partner turned to me. "Take care," he said, his voice low and clipped. He extended his hand, and I shook it. His grip was firm but brief, and just like that, he walked off into the shadows without a glance back. I lingered for a moment, standing alone in the icy stillness. Then, with a heavy heart, I made my way to my car. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, its weight tangible, like it was pressing down on my chest. The drive home was long and eerily quiet. The streets were empty, the city bathed in an unsettling stillness, as if the world itself was asleep. But my mind wasn't. My thoughts raced, tangled in a web of guilt and dread. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't move at first. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark, staring at the silhouette of my house. My family was inside, safe, warm, unaware of the nightmare I'd just lived through. I wanted to go inside and tell them everything to let it all out, but I couldn't. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? Eventually, I forced myself out of the car and into the house. The duffel bag thudded onto the kitchen table, a sound that seemed to echo in the silence. I stared at it, the bundle of money that should have felt like a reward but instead felt like a curse. The house was quiet, too quiet, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to amplify the chaos in my mind. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the containers. I heard the relentless banging. I saw those pale, fragile hands, trembling as they clung to the edge, and with every memory came the question I couldn't escape. What had I done? As the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, I sat up in bed, hollow and exhausted. I'd finished the job, but at what cost? The money might have been mine, but the weight of what I'd ignored, of what I'd chosen to stay silent about, was far heavier. And I knew one thing for certain. No amount of money could ever make me forget.
That is past amazing. My hands are so sweaty. I'm trying to rub the sweat of my hands to dry them. I am trying to ignore the lump in my throat. Can you imagine? They got the police and all the stuff on their side. These people are smart. When I say these people are smart, they are smart. There is a reason why $1 million, 2 trips. There's a reason for 2 trips. We don't just pay you once, because once you complete this trip, you clearly know what you have done. You know what you have done. If you complete that second trip, we know we can trust you. We don't have to off you. That's why it's 2 trips. See, you got to be a street person. So I'm breaking this stuff down to you. You do the 1 trip, you get the money. Let's say it's $500,000, right? You do the 1 trip, $500,000. We as the bass people, we don't know if you're going to talk or not. You know, you seen something. But once you did that first trip, you seen something. We know you seen it. We can tell the way you act. We know that you heard some type of banging. We not stupid. So what you gonna do? You gonna complete the second trip, get all the rest of your money, and keep your mouth shut? We know that we done sent pictures to you. We got you. We know you. We got you. Here's $1 million. All you got to do is keep your mouth shut, man. All you got to do is keep your mouth shut, man. Here's $1 million. You a truck driver? Have a better life. Or should they say, try to have a better life? What y'all think, man? Put it in the comments. Hey, y'all take it light, take it slow. Y'all tell them Uncle Mike told you so. Peace out.